900,000 men marched to these waters. By nightfall, the river ran red with blood.
Right here, 80,000 soldiers faced an army 11 times their size, and they won. The emperor looked at these mountains and saw soldiers in every tree. It was all an illusion. One false cry turned a tactical retreat into the greatest massacre in ancient Chinese history. This is the story of Fei River. The day composure crushed arrogance.
Fei River, 383 AD. How 80 Zhuorun Chinese defeated 900 Zhuorun's invaders, the bluff that saved the south. In the autumn of 383, the largest army China had ever seen marched south. Cavalry, infantry, archers, a serpent of steel and flesh that stretched for miles across the plains. Its leader, Fu Jian, emperor of the former Qin, had unified all of northern China under his command. Now, only a river separated him from total conquest. He looked at his forces and told his generals that if each soldier threw their whip into the waters of the Yangtze, the river's flow would be stopped. Victory seemed certain. The south would tremble before him. But on the other side of the Fei River, 80,000 men waited in silence. Professional soldiers trained for decades, who knew every curve of that land, and among them, a plan that would turn arrogance into ruin. Then came the order to retreat, one step back, just one, and the world collapsed. Screams echoed through the lines. Horses reared, banners fell into the mud. A cry ripped through the air. "The Qin army has been defeated!" Panic spread like fire in dry straw. Men ran over men, armors sank in the current. The sound of metal against metal turned into howls of despair. The river swallowed thousands. The land drank blood. When silence finally returned, the largest army in Chinese history had vanished. 80% of its forces lay dead or dispersed. And as Fu Jian fled wounded through the mountains, he cried out to the sky, "The heavens have annihilated me." A battle, a river, a bluff, and the fate of two civilizations rewritten forever. In the 4th century, China was a divided world. Since the fall of the Han dynasty, the territory that had once been unified had fragmented into rival kingdoms, each fighting for supremacy. In the north, nomadic tribes had established their own states, while in the south, the Eastern Jin dynasty maintained the Han legacy, ruling from its capital in Jiangkang, present-day Nanjing. Among all the northern states, none grew as rapidly as the former Qin. Led by the Di people, a tribe of Tibetan origin, the former Qin had emerged from chaos in the 350s. Its ruler, Fu Jian, was not just a conqueror, he was a visionary. Where other tribal leaders saw only plunder, Fu Jian saw empire. Where others sought submission, he offered integration. He appointed generals from conquered peoples to command positions. He kept defeated aristocrats in his court. He believed that universal benevolence could unite all peoples under a single banner. In 370, he conquered the former Yan. In 373, he took the province of Yi, including the lands that today form Sichuan. In 376, he completed the unification of all northern China by absorbing the former Liang. For the first time since the fall of the Han, a single ruler controlled all lands north of the Yangtze. Fu Jian looked south and saw only one remaining obstacle, the Eastern Jin dynasty. His wisest advisor, Wang Meng, had given him a final warning before dying in 375. "Do not make plans against the Jin after my death. The Xianbei and the Qiang are our true enemies and will eventually become problems. They must be gradually eliminated for the stability of the state." Fu Jian heard the words, but did not keep them in his heart. The vision of a unified China was too powerful. The Eastern Jin, in turn, survived more by circumstance than by strength. Its court was a labyrinth of intrigues between aristocratic clans vying for influence. The Huan, the Wang, the Shi, each family sought power while Emperor Xiaowu watched, too young and too weak to impose his will. The kingdom's defenses depended on the Yangtze River as a natural barrier, and on fortresses scattered along the Huai River. the first line against any invasion from the north. In 379, the strategic city of Xiangyang, gateway to the middle Yangtze, fell into the hands of the former Qin. The blow shook the Jin court. If Xiangyang had fallen, what would prevent Fujian from marching directly on Jiankang? The palace corridors filled with whispers of surrender. Some nobles were already preparing their families to flee even further south. It was in this moment of despair that a man emerged from the shadows of the court. Xian was a peculiar politician. He had spent decades refusing official positions, preferring a contemplative life in the eastern mountains, where he played Go and discussed philosophy with monks and hermits. When he finally agreed to serve the empire, he brought with him a calm that seemed to defy reality itself. While others panicked, Xian played Go. While messengers brought terrible news, he recited poetry. His serenity was not indifference, it was strategy. Xian understood that the greatest danger to the Jin was not Fujian's army, but the panic of his own court. If the nobles fled, if the generals lost faith, no wall would be strong enough. So he became the anchor. His calm soothed hearts. His silent confidence said what words could not. We will resist. In the years leading up to the battle, Xian worked discreetly to strengthen the kingdom's defenses. His greatest asset was his nephew, Xie Xuan, a young general who had taken command of the Beifu army. Unlike the forced levies that made up most armies of the time, the Beifu soldiers were professionals. Many were refugees from the north, families who had fled previous conquests and now fought to protect their new home. They knew the terrain, they knew the enemy, and they had something no forced recruitment could buy: absolute loyalty. The army numbered about 80,000 men. It was a fraction of what Fujian could muster. But each Beifu soldier was worth 10 poorly trained conscripts, and Xian knew that, in war, quality often surpassed quantity. In the spring of 383, Fujian made his decision. He summoned his generals and announced general mobilization against the Jin. 6 out of 10 able-bodied men were recruited. 30,000 elite guards were assembled. In August, his brother Fu Rong departed with 300,000 soldiers as the vanguard force. Fujian himself followed with 270,000 cavalry and 600,000 infantry. The numbers were so vast that the columns stretched for miles, a human tide flowing inexorably south. Fu Rong had opposed the campaign. Other advisors also expressed doubts. The army was immense, but its composition was problematic. Soldiers from dozens of different peoples marched under the Qin banners. Xianbei, Qiang, Han Chinese, each group with its own language, its own commanders, its own questionable loyalty. Many had been forced to enlist. Others served only for rations and pay. Discipline was loose, coordination almost impossible. Fujian dismissed all objections. The size of his army was his answer to any doubt. How could he lose with such a force? Even if half his men fled, he would still have more soldiers than any army the Jin could muster. In September, the vanguard forces captured the city of Shuyang, a critical fortress on the Fei River line. Fujian, eager for a quick victory, left the bulk of his troops behind and rode with 8,000 elite cavalry to join his brother. He wanted to be present when the Jin surrendered. It was then that he made his first fatal mistake. A Jin officer named Zhu Shu had been captured months earlier and held at Fujian's court. The emperor sent him as a messenger to convince the Jin commanders to surrender. After all, what choice did they have in the face of such overwhelming force? But Zhu Shu had not forgotten his loyalty. Instead of delivering the surrender message, he secretly informed the Jin generals that the Qin forces were not yet fully assembled. The time to attack was now, before the giant could close its fist. Xie Xuan acted immediately. With 5,000 elite soldiers, he attacked Fu Rong's advanced forces and inflicted a devastating defeat, killing 15,000 men. The blow was more psychological than strategic. For the first time, the Qin troops saw that they were not invincible. In the Jin capital, Xian received the reports while playing Go with a guest. His face revealed nothing. When asked about the situation, he merely replied, "The plans have already been made," and continued his game. On the battlefield, the two armies finally met on the banks of the Fei River in November 383. The Qin forces occupied the west bank, the Jin, the east bank. The river ran between them, too wide to be crossed under fire, too narrow to be ignored. A stalemate. Fu Jian ascended an observation tower in the city of Shouyang and looked at the horizon. He saw the Jin formations aligned with military precision. Their banners fluttered in the wind. Their lines seemed to stretch endlessly. Then he looked at the Bagong Mountains to the north and felt his blood run cold. Every tree, every bush seemed like an enemy soldier. His heart, until then inflated with confidence, began to waver. The paranoia born at that moment would be remembered for centuries. The Chinese would create a proverb to describe it, seeing soldiers in every tree and bush. What Fu Jian did not know was that Xie Xuan had ordered his troops to spread out in wide formations, creating the illusion of much larger numbers than they actually had. The bluff was working. Xie Xuan sent a messenger with a bold proposal. He asked the Qin forces to retreat a little to the west, allowing the Jin army to cross the river. Thus, the two sides could finally face each other in open battle. It was an absurd suggestion. Why would any commander give an advantage to the enemy? Most Qin generals immediately rejected the idea. Moving an army of that size was too complicated. The soldiers were poorly trained. Coordination was precarious. A retreat, even a tactical one, could easily turn into chaos. But Fu Jian saw an opportunity. If he agreed to the retreat, he could attack the Jin as they crossed the river, catching them divided and vulnerable. The tactic was ancient, almost classic. It would be an elegant victory. He ordered the retreat. Fu Rong agreed and transmitted the order. The troops began to move back, and then the world collapsed. The soldiers in the back lines did not understand why they were retreating. Rumors spread like fire. Some said the front lines had been defeated. Others whispered that Fu Rong himself had been killed. Morale, already fragile, shattered. Men who marched in order began to walk faster, then to run. Zhu Shu, still infiltrated among the Qin forces, chose this moment to shout with all the strength of his lungs, "The Qin army has been defeated! The Qin army has been defeated!" The cry cut through the ranks like a blade. Panic turned into hysteria. Horses reared and threw their riders into the mud. Soldiers dropped their weapons and ran. Officers shouted orders that no one heard. The rear pushed the vanguard. The vanguard stumbled over those who had already fallen. The ordered retreat became a stampede. Fu Rong mounted his horse and galloped between the lines, trying to restore order. His voice was hoarse from shouting. His arms ached from gesturing. He needed the men to stop. He needed them to look at him. He needed just one moment of silence. He never got it. His horse stumbled and fell. Fu Rong was thrown to the ground. Before he could get up, Jin soldiers who had crossed the river amidst the chaos reached him. Their blades came down. The emperor's brother died in the mud, trampled by his own fleeing army. News of Fu Rong's death spread even faster than the previous panic. The last anchor of discipline had disappeared. There was no longer an army. There was only a terrified crowd fleeing in all directions. Xie Xuan and his generals, Xie Yan and Huan Yi, crossed the river and launched the main attack. Their Beifu troops, disciplined and focused, cut through the chaos like blades through silk. It was not a battle. It was a harvest. The river filled with bodies. Men drowned under the weight of their own armor. Others were trampled by panicked horses. The sound was indescribable. Screams, splashing, the dull thud of bodies against bodies. The water ran red as far as the eye could see. The Jin generals pursued the fugitives for miles. They found chaotic trails of footprints in the mud, tracks of abandoned wagon wheels, equipment hastily thrown away. It was not the orderly retreat of an army. It was the desperate flight of men who had forgotten everything except fear. Estimates of casualties vary among historical records, but all agree on one thing. It was an unprecedented catastrophe. 70 to 80% of Fu Jian's forces perished in battle, in flight, or from hunger and exposure in the days that followed. Tens of thousands drowned in the river. Thousands more died trampled. Still more died of exhaustion as they fled through hostile territories without food or water. Fu Jian escaped, but only barely. An arrow struck him during the chaos. Wounded and humiliated, he fled north under the protection of Murong Chui, one of the few generals whose forces had not collapsed. As he rode through the mountains, it is said that he cried out to the sky, "The heavens have annihilated me!" Behind him, the Fei River slowly returned to its natural color. The current carried the bodies away. Silence returned to the bloody banks. And somewhere in the Jin lines, exhausted soldiers began to realize that they had just won one of the most decisive battles in Chinese history. In the Jin capital, the news arrived while Xi'an was playing Go with a guest. A messenger ran in, breathless, barely able to form words. Xi'an read the report in silence. His face revealed nothing. When his guest asked what had happened, Xi'an replied in a calm voice, "The boys won a battle." Only that. The boys won a battle. He finished the game, bid farewell to the guest, walked towards his quarters. And then, as he crossed the threshold of the door, he stumbled and broke his sandal against the doorframe. In that brief moment, his composure finally broke. The emotion he had contained for months finally found an outlet. Even the firmest mountain can tremble when the weight is lifted. The consequences of the Battle of Fei River reverberated for centuries. The former Qin, which had seemed destined to unify all of China, disintegrated into almost immediate civil war. The people's Fujian had so generously incorporated into his empire, took advantage of the defeat to declare independence. Murongcui, the general who had protected Fujian's escape, rebelled in early 384 and founded the later Yan. Yao Chang, a Qiang general, established the later Qin. Other states rose from the ruins like mushrooms after rain. Fujian tried to regain control, but his prestige had been destroyed along with his army. In 385, Chang'an, his capital, fell to the rebel forces. Fujian himself was captured and executed by Yao Chang, the founder of the later Qin. The man who had dreamed of unifying all of China died as a prisoner in his own land. The Eastern Jin, on the other hand, experienced a brief revival. Zixian's forces advanced north and recovered territories up to the Yellow River. For a moment, it seemed possible that Jin itself could unify China. But the court remained divided. Xi'an died in 385, and without his leadership, the aristocratic factions returned to their usual intrigues. The opportunity was lost. The battle delayed the unification of China by almost 200 years. The north would remain fragmented among rival states until the rise of the Sui dynasty in 581. The south would maintain its independence, preserving traditions and culture that might have been lost under a northern conquest. Historians debate whether this was good or bad for Chinese civilization. What they do not debate is the magnitude of the event. Two proverbs were born from that November day in 383. The first, "Seeing soldiers in every tree and bush," describes the paranoia that consumed Fujian when he looked at the Bagong Mountains. The second, "Frightened by the sound of the wind and the cry of cranes," captures the panic that turned an ordered retreat into catastrophe. Both entered the Chinese language as eternal warnings about the dangers of arrogance and fear. And what about Xi'an, the man whose calm saved an empire? He never sought glory. He refused honors. When offered lands and titles, he only asked to be allowed to return to his mountains. He died a few years after the battle, more remembered for his Go game than for his military strategy. Perhaps that was exactly how he wanted it. The Fei River no longer exists. Its course has been altered by centuries of human work, absorbed by other waterways, forgotten by modern geography. But its memory remains. In historical texts, in the proverbs that are still used, in the remembrance of an autumn afternoon when 80,000 men proved that numbers are not destiny. Empires rise and fall. Armies march and are forgotten. But there are moments when the course of history turns on a single point, a single decision, a single cry in the midst of chaos. The Fei River was one of those moments. A daring bluff, a misinterpreted retreat, and an empire that discovered, too late, that the greatest fortress is not made of soldiers, but of discipline, loyalty, and calm in the face of the impossible. Centuries passed. The river disappeared from maps, but on silent nights in Anhui province, where its waters once ran red, they say one can still hear something. Not the screams of the dead, not the roar of battle. Just the sound of the wind in the trees, the distant cry of a crane, in the remembrance of a day when one man's calm and 80,000's courage saved a civilization.